I'm just going to launch some questions here with you guys. So let me start with John. The question is, how have you seen Christians in business, particularly, I guess, in Indonesia or maybe other places, contribute to the flourishing of their communities while prioritizing the gospel?
Yeah, well, I would have to say the most effective church planner I know in Jakarta is a businessman. He's an American who's been in Jakarta for about 30 years, and he works for a large property development company. And he's been a part of at least 4 church plants that he has initiated. Yeah, so he's brought that mindset to his work. He's known for being a man of integrity, and there's we'll probably talk more about this, but at least in Indonesia, there's an idea a lot of times that only the pastors are the ones that are doing ministry, and there's no connection to your life if you're in business. And so he's really kind of shattered that mindset and been an example to a lot of people. But yeah, I also there's a growing number of organizations that are trying to kind of help Christian businessmen and women operate with integrity in their business, which unfortunately, I mean, Indonesia is known for corrupt business practices, and it's almost this idea of, you can't be successful unless you're corrupt. And so they've been kind of pushing against that and teaching their people to have a long-term view of, maybe in the short run you won't get that deal if you don't take that bribe or things like that. But in the long run, it's actually more successful to be an honest businessman, because people are going to want to do business with you once you have that reputation. The one thing I haven't seen a whole lot of is there's a lot of push to bring these kingdom values to the workplace, which is great. We want to be honest and have integrity and be kind, but it's almost like we're trying to create a kingdom culture without the king. And so what I'm trying to do is get people to say, it's great to have integrity. It's great to be a witness through your life, but eventually you have to share the gospel. You have to introduce people to the king. And so that's what I'm trying to do with our people. Yeah. And this guy I mentioned is a great example of doing that in our context. So
I know the man you're talking about. Met with him several times, and godly man, originally from the U.S., and he went all in, and he is down now in Jakarta, helping to run a major corporation, and he serves Christ right there in the marketplace. I actually spent some time with the CEO of that company, and he disciples people in Jakarta. He charges them $2,500 because he's going to give them, they're going through the master's degrees and maybe PhDs. He doesn't need the money. He's a very wealthy man, but he does say this: if they want to be mentored and discipled in their field, that he wants to give them an opportunity to have some investment in the game. So he doesn't need the money, but it does make them or help them to be serious, and they have to be believers, and they have to be serious about pursuing Christ in whatever industry they're in. So great ministry there. We're going to come back to John. By the way, I should have mentioned that John has chapter 57 and 56 in your book there. So chapter 56 and 57. All right, LC, you have an insert on page 865. We're glad you're here. As I said, you're from a secret place. So whatever it is that you want to disclose with that, sure. Is there anything you want to say before I ask your question?
We've been in the Middle East for almost 14 years. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you went there to serve Christ in the marketplace?
Right. That's right.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So, can I do a 60-second wrap up?
Of course.
Provide context to the narrative?
Please do.
Thank you. So we were serving on staff at a church, and the Lord started working on our hearts. So I did 7 trips to the country that we were praying about. And I actually, through those 7 trips, spent hundreds of hours doing interviews, questions and answers, research, and came to the conclusion that the people who had the longest ministry, the most effective ministry, were all doing real business, marketplace ministers. And so I came to the conclusion that that was not for me because I was on staff at a church. And so I came home. I said, "When am I going to go?" So long story short, God allowed me to reinvent myself. I went back to school, got my MBA, and then went over and got a job. So my context, so you know where I'm coming from, is I've always worked as an employee for a local company in management, and so I've been in 3 different fields. Um, so that's my context, because with every case study that you'll hopefully study and consider and evaluate, just make sure that you have proper interpretation, right? It's from hermeneutics in a sense, right? There's a context, and so you want to be able to correctly size up the situation so that you can gather out the value you need and be able to apply truth for yourself. So we've been there for almost 14 years, working for companies and just kind of the general sales channels,
Yeah.
international exports, and exports. So governments love it when you bring hard currency into their market, so they always support export business.
Amen.
So if you're looking for a sweet spot, go into somewhere and then from there export to somewhere else.
There you go. Both of what you gentlemen just said reminded me of Psalm 15. Make mental note of Psalm 15. Have a quiet time there and consider the importance of what the Lord describes, what David describes with those who get to be in God's presence. It talks about legal, talks about finance, talks about a lot of things. 5 verses. So let me ask you a question. Here we go. Your marketplace ministry is in a restricted access country, and it has its own unique challenges. Tell us about the importance of establishing credibility. Just kind of touched on that a little bit just now, in your social context. Explain that credibility that has to. You can't just walk in and say, "Hey, I got a Bible and I need to tell you about the Lord."
I grew up with Italian, so I had to put my water bottle down. The reality is, whenever you go anywhere in the world, people will ask you 2 questions. The first question is,
What do you do?
no,
Where are you from?
what is your name? Second question is,
What do you do?
what do you do? So, my observation has been, after many years, is that many people get to that second question within 60 seconds, and that's the watershed moment for years to come. Because the moment they get to the second question, depends on how they answer that question, is how they're being sized up and interpreted. And Genesis chapter 46, Joseph meets his brothers, and he says, "You're about to meet Pharaoh," and he says, "You could say this, or you could say this," to the question of, what is your occupation? And in the original language, there's 2 different words. So it's not like the Word of God doesn't address this issue, and there's other things you could go to, 1 Samuel 16, there's a bunch of passages we could run through that just kind of help us think through how you communicate who you are is very important. And God will give you a story to share for that moment as well. And so I can say that I have seen unbelievable things, hundreds of scenarios where I would walk into a situation. I'm like, how are we going to walk through and talk through this situation? What's my story? What's my piece in this? And over and over and over again, God has done amazing things. So I would say is the challenge is thinking through how you're going to land your plane in this country you're going to serve. And I'm assuming and hoping that you all want to go to an unreached nation or hard to reach nation. Is going to make a big difference. Where I live, the average stay of a sent one, or a person who elders have laid hands on them to send them, is between 2 to 3 years is the average length of their stay there. And so it makes a big difference on the choices you make before you even get on the plane as to how you're going to pursue long term. Because the moment they ask you what you do, And if you're thinking in the back of my mind, well, they have an anti-proselytizing law in this country, and they just killed somebody last year, and you start going through the mental notes in your mind, you start thinking through, how am I going to answer that question, right? And it's so important that you ask the Lord to help you give an answer with integrity, faith, but that He's also going to give you a very specific story to be able to share, to be able to be there. Once you have a clear identity, then you can make choices to really be, to go back to the Jeremiah passage and the Shalom passage, to have a long-term presence. And so there's some good material you can read on that on that subject out there. And so we made choices we put our kids in local schools, and they went through K through 12th grade, kindergarten through 12th grade in local schools, and just pursued being deeply embedded in society. And so the challenges is, I'm going to interpret the word challenges because we could go several different directions.
Okay.
But I think the main challenge would be relational, because you're there to connect with people, share the gospel, disciple. I mean, it's relational. So to overcome the relational challenge is you have to think through how you're going to go as an individual, as your family. And if God gives you wisdom, and He will, you'll be able to make the kind of decisions to overcome that relational challenge. So I have seen many people who are sent once and go overseas, and the local people say of them, they're a shady character. And it's not because they're mafia members, but because they're not able to articulate a proper narrative, then they're left with no option but to consider them as a shady character. And so that's an important challenge to overcome.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. John, it's your turn again.
Okay.
Here we go. So talk to us about humility. There we go. You're a humble man. No. Talk to us about humility, wisdom, and genuine, here it is, genuine concern for others. Others help remove to remove personal barriers, that you're dealing with there for gospel clarity. So you want to hear the gospel, but
Yeah.
you're clear.
I mean, I got a couple stories that might hit on that. We'll see. So I'm not a businessman. I can barely use my credit card, but my wife started a business, which she's a doctor, and so it's a medical business. Foreigners can't practice medicine in Indonesia, but we have a business that enables her to hire Indonesian medical workers, so we can disciple them, and they can go out into areas where we couldn't just go as missionaries. And so through that, just caring for the medical needs of the people in our community, we've earned a lot of trust. And during COVID, when the hospitals were all closed down or full, we had a neighbor who was dying of cancer. So my wife was over there every day, doing palliative care, basically. Well, it's not business, but it's still. And she ended up passing away. Turns out her father-in-law was the leader of the community. And in Indonesia, you have to have the community's signature to start any kind of church in the area. And so we went to him when we wanted to start a church, and he said, "We want you here. We want your people here. You're a blessing to our community. I'll sign whatever you want us to sign." And so just through her business, which was actually the business of caring for people, we were able to have the legitimacy to have a church there.
Yeah.
Another thing, and I'm not sure, this probably overlaps, but we found that a lot of our people, so nobody goes to Jakarta for any other reason than to make money, to work and make money. Most people who are in Jakarta are not from Jakarta. They've come there to work and send money back to the village. And so people are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and traffic is horrible. So they're spending 2 to 3 hours in traffic a day. So they don't have time for much else. And so we found that a lot of our people weren't seriously trying to make disciples because they're like, I don't have any time. And they thought of it as an activity that they have to add into their schedule. So we tried to change their mindset of, hey, you're around people all day. Make disciples where you are. Ministry is people. You have access to these people that I don't have access to, but you're in the office building with them all day. You're seeing them. And so we're trying to equip our people to make disciples where they are, not think of disciple making as an additional thing they have to add into their life. And then just lastly, like you talk about what you love, right?
Yeah.
And so my job as their pastor is just to grow their love for Christ, and then they naturally are going to talk about it with the people they spend most of their life with at work. And then we've also started some groups that can go into these businesses, and let's say we have one person from our church who works there. Well, we have a group that will go and bring lunch for everybody and just give that person an opportunity to put the love of Christ on display. And we all like to quote John 13, they'll know you're my disciples by your love for one another. But then we don't ever create any opportunities for the world to see Christians loving each other. And so what we try to do is we try to go into these spaces, these workplaces, and bring a piece of the Christian community there so that their Muslim coworkers can see, like, wow, these people treat each other better. They care about each other. So those are some things that we've been trying.
Excellent. Just listening to you, man, things that run through my head is when you serve Christ well, in whatever it is that you're serving him, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, cashier, do we even have those anymore? Police officer. People want to know what makes you tick. Why are you different? How come you're not defensive when the boss is on the warpath? And so you need to have passages of scripture that really feed into your life, that are informative. I mentioned Psalm 15. I did a chapter in the book on Ephesians 6 about serving Christ as unto the Lord, serving your boss as unto the Lord. Think about those kinds of things. There's so many ways that you can think about how to serve him well that draws questions. And once the questions are drawn, you have the responsibility to ask them. Answer them. Be ready to give a reason for the hope that's within you. 1 Peter 3. Are you ready for another one? LC? LC, right? Okay, here we go. What is one tangible, actionable next step that Christians in any vocation can take to integrate their faith into their daily work and interaction?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think just cultivating a skill set of integrating truth and scripture into everyday conversations would be very important, right? And so, honestly, I think it'd be harder for me here because over there, the moment I say Jesus is God, I clear the room. So,
or they clear the room,
yeah.
clear you out of the room.
So, so there is, but just learning how to, bring truth into that conversation, whether it be a verse or a phrase, and so forth. I remember I was in a meeting one time with the general manager of the biggest media group in the country. He had like armed guards at the door, right? Because they went to death threats every day. So he had his security detail at the door, and I was inside with him. And he said something, and I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "What?" I said, "You just said this." He goes, "I don't know. Well, Jesus said something similar to that." And he goes, "What?" I go, "Yeah, were you reading what he was saying?" And he goes, "No." And then he goes, "Tell me more."
Wow.
And that was like 4 lines.
Yeah.
And so I pulled out my phone. I got my app open, and I read Matthew 5, Matthew 6, right there in his office. Yeah. So it opened up quite the conversation.
Very good.
And we were safe. We had the security detail. So just ask the Lord to give you wisdom to just bring truth into those conversations, and you will see him do some amazing things.
Excellent. We could go a little bit longer, but I'm wondering if maybe there's a few questions that we could address before we break. Let me ask this. Does this resonate with your own work in your own office place? Do you often think about how could I have said something or done something different? Yes,
I have
sir.
a question. Do either of you have any examples of people doing this wrong or going about it in a wrong way that maybe either shoots themselves in the foot or kind of gets in the way of the message of Christ?
I'll just go quickly and then.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, speaking from like a missionary standpoint, like there's a lot of missionaries who go in trying to use business just kind of as a front, but they don't do business well. And I know of a number of agencies that have taken that approach, and eventually people get wise and they get kicked out, and it just brings shame on the work, And so that's definitely one that happens.
And to continue with that thought, I mean, it's not tent making, it's tent faking.
Right. Yeah.
And it's actually quite insulting to your audience to think that they would actually not think otherwise, right? And so they are actually quite offended when you do that. And so I met many people who come in and have, they rent an office space, and then people say, "What do you do in your office?" And they have a hard time explaining, but it's like they have an office. So it's a shell company, it's a money laundering operation, right? So what else are they going to think about you? And so the challenge is, there's unfortunately, I know several agencies who actually encourage, say, well, you're actually there to do full-time work, and you can't do that, so you shouldn't do that. So do the bare minimum, or just do something that's only on paper so that you can be there. And that never works. That never works. And so I've seen it in more than one country because I've traveled around the region, and it just never works. And then the other thing is those people then wonder why they have no local friends, And I'm like, why would you hang out with somebody who seems like they're like a criminal, And that's actually what they think of people who are sent ones, So it's a really sad thing to observe actually. You're going with a message of truth, and everybody thinks you're a liar, agent, mafia, whatever. It's really like, so I just was very about year 4 for me, year 5, and I'll finish with this, and to God be the glory. Let me just say, somebody who had been there long term in country said, you're asking questions, and they said, wow, you really speak like a veteran person. But I think what you have to do mathematically, and this is what my insert alludes to, is that when you do marketplace ministry, you multiply by 10 times the amount of time you're with people, right? So the average person is spending 6 hours a week with a local. I'm doing 60. So mathematically, it's not hard to understand, right, that the learning circle, or the learning curve, shortens significantly. So it's not hard to explain. And then the other thing that was really stood out to us was somebody came up to us with a very large agency and said, we're going to leave. This place is really hard. And you know what it's like. Nobody wants to hang out with you, and we don't have any friends. Well, I was in a situation at that time where I was getting phone calls every week to spend time with my family, and I was having to say no to people. And I'm not drawing attention to myself other than to impress upon you how crucial it is that you think through your philosophy of ministry and your business model as well. That's important. And God will open tremendous doors. And God's allowed my 3 children to do some pretty historical things, for which I'm thankful for their sake, because it was pretty big for their faith. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Just a few last. Any more? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What does it look like for a marketplace missionary in a local church where you're at?
It depends on the context, right? I mean, you probably want to answer that, or
I mean, that's what I would say.
every country is different.
Right.
Every city is different. And so it just depends on what a person does. What is the marketplace, right? Space that they're in. What's the business they're in? What context are they in?
Is there a local church there already, or is there one that needs to be planted? Are you part of a team where you can work together to plant something? Because you're not going to have time to plant a church necessarily if you're working full time.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on the situation. Yeah.
Robert Bruce, Scottish missionary in Persia, in about 1870-71, we're not exactly sure when, said that he spent the most of his time pulling stones out of the ground. And he said, may this also be considered loving missionary work.
Mm.
You know, it was 1870, 1871. Robert Bruce, a Scottish guy. And there are places in the world where there is no church, there is no nothing. And all day long, from morning to night, you just feel like all you're doing is pulling out a stone and replacing it with a seed, pulling out a stone and replacing it with a seed. And that's glorious work. Something that's worthy to invest your life in. Yeah.
And with that, remember, this is what I've always told my kids when they were young, is you find your church first, then you find your job, then you find your house. Internationally, it may not be that way, but if you're thinking of going internationally, you want to be a part of a healthy body, right? Unless the Lord has just gifted you with digging up stones and there's no other people, other believers around you. You want to be a part of a healthy church because that's where you drive the people you're witnessing to be a part of that congregation. I'm going to close with this because we only have 1 minute left. As marketplace ministers, you are part of the mission field. You're either a goer or a sender, right? So you're either going to go and serve like these guys, or you're going to be senders, or what was the other one? You're disobedient. So figure out a way, Lord, what would you have me do? And I would encourage you not to jump first to say, I want to get out of my career and go serve in ministry. You know what? You are in ministry. I'm working on a project right now. I'm curious to know, since I used to be long ago a supply chain expert, how did William Tyndale get his Bibles to England? He didn't do it by himself. He was a translator. History's full of those stories. And it's fascinating to think that we have Bibles, English Bibles, because they were faithful business people who gave up everything to give us English Bibles. What are you, I'm not going to say what you're willing to give up, but how are you going to serve the Lord in the marketplace in a way that faithfully gives him glory? And that's your quiet time in the morning. Go to Psalm 15. What do those 5 verses represent in your life? Are you going to have the characteristics to be in God's presence when you're dealing with extremely difficult situations where you're going to be held to account for your honesty? Ephesians 6, are you working as unto Christ? 3 John, the book of 3 John. It's about a guy who was a missionary supporter, probably a businessman, maybe a farmer, I don't know. But he took care of the missionaries as they came through town. Marketplace people, that is part of your job. If you're not a goer, you're a sender. And you have a prayer request. Lord, how can I help